In the shadows of a Wyoming saloon, a kind-hearted barmaid's secret act of compassion toward a mysterious orphan boy attracts the deadly attention of four notorious outlaws riding into town. What terrible secret connects these dangerous men to the quiet child she's been protecting? A gunshot cracked the dawn silence, jolting Eleanor awake. She bolted upright, heart hammering, before recognizing the sound. Just a hunter in the hills. Breathing deeply, she pushed back her long auburn hair from her face. Another day in Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1885. Another day of survival. The wooden floors creaked beneath her bare feet as she crossed to the small window of her rustic cabin. Outside, four horsemen approached on the horizon, their silhouettes dark against the golden morning sky. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as fear gripped her heart. They had found her. Wagon wheels rattled on the dusty main street. A cowboy shouted at his horse. The smell of wood smoke hung in the crisp mountain air. Sarah's gaze drifted to the narrow alley beside the saloon, where she'd first spotted him 3 weeks ago. A boy no older than 7, half-starved and watching the back door like a coyote might eye a henhouse. She dressed quickly in her simple brown dress and white apron, mind already on the food she'd set aside yesterday. Children shouldn't go hungry. She knew that feeling too well. "Mighty early to be moving about, Miss Sarah," called Hiram, the white-bearded bartender, as she descended the stairs to the empty saloon. His bushy eyebrows lifted. "Ain't nobody gonna be drinking for hours yet. Not here for the customers." Sarah moved behind the bar, unwrapping yesterday's bread roll and adding a thick slice of cheese. She hesitated, then tucked in a strip of dried beef. The boy looked like he needed meat on his bones. Hiram snorted, leaning heavily on his cane. "That stray again? Folks are talking, you know. Say you're inviting trouble." "Let them talk," Sarah said, wrapping the food in a clean napkin. "They've got nothing better to do in this town." The back door squeaked on rusty hinges as she pushed it open. Morning sunlight painted the alley in gold and shadow. At first glance, it appeared empty. Just some barrels, a stack of crates, and flies buzzing around puddles from yesterday's rain. Sarah waited. This was their routine now. Movement caught her eye, a small figure emerging from behind the largest crate. The boy was thinner than any child should be, with dark hair matted against his head and clothes that hung from his slight frame. But his eyes, a startling, vivid blue, were alert, wary, and far too old for his years. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, extending the napkin-wrapped package. "I brought extra today." The boy didn't speak, his gaze darting between her face and the offered food. Like a wild animal, Sarah thought, afraid of the trap but too hungry to resist the bait. He inched forward on bare feet caked with dirt, never taking his eyes off her. When he was close enough, his hand shot out, snatching the package before retreating 3 steps. "You know," Sarah said conversationally, as if they did this every day, which in fact they had been. "Most folks exchange names when they meet.
I'm Sarah Blackwood.
I work here at the saloon." The boy unwrapped the corner of the napkin, revealing the bread. His stomach growled audibly, but still he hesitated, studying her face. "Not poisoned," she said with a small smile. "Promise." Finally, he took a tentative bite, then began devouring the food with such speed Sarah worried he might choke. "Slow down there," she cautioned. "It's not going anywhere." Surprisingly, he obeyed, chewing more carefully. When he'd swallowed, he spoke. So quietly Sarah had to strain to hear. "Thomas." The sound of his voice, small but clear, made her heart leap. A victory. "Thomas," she repeated. "That's a fine name. Where are your folks, Thomas?" His expression shuddered immediately, jaw tightening. He stuffed the remaining food into his pocket and backed away. "Wait," Sarah began, but the boy turned and vanished around the corner of the building, quick as a rabbit. "Damn," she muttered, then sighed. Progress, even small, was still progress. Back inside, Hiram was polishing glasses, his roomy eyes curious. "He talked today? Name's Thomas." Sarah moved behind the bar, tying her apron strings. "Nothing else yet. MMM. Hiram set down a glass with a clink. Sheriff should know about a vagrant child. Sarah's hand tightened on a rag. Sheriff Rollins spends more time playing cards than keeping law. Besides, she added quietly, some orphanages are worse than the streets. Memories flashed. St. Agnes Home for Girls, the switch across her palms, the locked closet, the hunger. She'd escaped at 15, found work in a Chicago restaurant before heading west. Freedom, however meager, had saved her. The front door banged open, making them both jump. Henderson, the telegraph operator, burst in, his normally tidy appearance disheveled, eyes wide with excitement. "You ain't gonna believe the wire I just got," he announced, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "The Morton gang was spotted crossing into Wyoming yesterday. Word is they're headed this way." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The Morton gang? Here? Why would they bother with a small place like Cottonwood? Henderson shrugged, clearly enjoying being the bearer of dramatic news. "Who knows why outlaws do anything? But I thought folks should be warned." He leaned across the bar. "Four of the meanest brothers ever to terrorize the territories. They say Jeremiah Morton's face is split by a scar from a woman who crossed him years back. He's been hunting her ever since." The room seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. A roaring filled her ears. "You all right, Miss Sarah?" Hiram asked, frowning. Gone white as a sheet. She forced herself to nod, fingers gripping the edge of the bar. "Just surprising news." "Well, I'm off to spread the word," Henderson declared, heading for the door. "Marshal Davis has been notified, but he's 2 days' ride from here." As the door swung shut behind him, Hiram muttered, "Damn fool seems happy about bringing trouble to our doorstep." But Sarah barely heard him. Her mind raced with calculations, how quickly she could pack, how much money she had saved, where she might go this time. After 4 years of peace in Cottonwood Creek, she'd grown careless, comfortable. She'd stopped looking over her shoulder. And now, "Miss Sarah," Hiram's voice broke through her thoughts. "You sure you're all right?" She met his concerned gaze and made a split-second decision. "Hiram, there's something I need to tell you. Something about who I was before I came here." The old bartender's expression softened as he set down the glass he'd been polishing. "Figured you were running from something. Most folks who end up in places like this are." "Not something," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Someone. And if the Mortons are coming to Cottonwood Creek, it might be because they've finally found me." Outside the window, a small figure darted past. Thomas, clutching his food bundle, unaware that his world was about to change again. Sarah's gaze lingered on him. How strange, she thought, that after years of looking out only for herself, it was this half-wild boy who made her hesitate to run. "They killed my pa," Thomas said, his small voice steady despite the words. "Shot him dead right in front of me." Early morning light streamed through the cracks of the storage shed behind the saloon. 2 weeks had passed since Henderson's news about the Morton gang, yet they hadn't appeared. Sarah had spent every day planning her escape, but every night finding reasons to delay. Now she sat on an upturned barrel, watching Thomas devour a bowl of porridge. It had taken days of coaxing, but he'd finally agreed to eat at a proper table rather than scurrying off with wrapped food. And today, unexpectedly, he'd started talking. "Your father," Sarah repeated carefully. "When did this happen?" Thomas scraped the last bit of porridge from the bowl. "Winter. We had a farm north of here. 3 men came saying Pa owed them money." His blue eyes clouded with memory. "Pa said he didn't." There was shouting, then shooting. Sarah's chest tightened. "What about your mother?" "Died when I was little." He shrugged with the forced indifference of a child who'd learned to hide pain. "Pa said she's in heaven." "And after your father was killed, what happened?" "Ran away before they could catch me. Been living here and there since." His voice remained matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than his own tragedy. Sarah studied him. The thin shoulders, the stubborn chin, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. A survivor like her. "Thomas," she said gently, Would you recognize the men who hurt your father? Something darkened in the boy's gaze. Yes, especially the one with the split face. Sarah's heart stuttered. Split face. Like someone cut him with a knife. Right here. Thomas drew a line from his forehead to his jaw. He was the one who pulled the trigger. Jeremiah Morton. Sarah's hand trembled as she took Thomas's empty bowl. Why? He asked suddenly. Why what? Why do you feed me? Nobody else does. The simple question caught her off guard. Because, she started, then hesitated. Because I know what it's like to be hungry and alone. Thomas considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. They're looking for you, aren't they? The men who killed Pa. Sarah stiffened. What makes you say that? Heard folks talking. About a woman the Morton gang is hunting. His eyes, too sharp for his years, held hers. It's you, isn't it? Before she could answer, the shed door flew open. Hiram stood there, breathing hard. They're here, he gasped. Four riders just pulled up in front of the saloon. Morton gang. Sure as hell. Fear crashed through Sarah like a wave. Too late to run. Too late to hide. Thomas slid from his seat, moving to stand beside her, his small hand finding hers. What will you do? Sarah looked down at their joined hands. His dirty and calloused, hers worn from years of work. Something fierce and protective rose in her chest. Hiram, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Take Thomas out the back way. Get him somewhere safe. The old bartender nodded grimly. And you? I'll handle them. Sarah pulled open a drawer, removing a small pistol she kept hidden there. I've been running from Jeremiah Morton for 8 years. Time to end it.
No.
Thomas protested, gripping her hand tighter. They'll kill you like they killed Pa. Sarah knelt before him, meeting his gaze directly. Thomas, listen carefully. These men are dangerous. I need you safe. Please go with Hiram. But I promise I'll find you after. She squeezed his shoulders gently. Some things in life you can't outrun forever. This is one of mine. Tears filled the boy's eyes, but he nodded reluctantly. Hiram took Thomas's hand. Miss Sarah, you sure about this? She wasn't, not at all. But the alternative, running again, dragging Thomas into her nomadic life of fear, or worse, leaving him behind, was unthinkable. Go quickly, she urged. As they slipped out the back door, Sarah tucked the pistol into her apron pocket and straightened her shoulders. The sound of boots on wooden planks echoed from the saloon proper. Drawing a deep breath, she pushed through the door into the main room. Four men stood just inside the entrance, dust from the trail coating their long coats. Their eyes adjusted to the dim interior, scanning each corner before settling on her. At their center stood a tall man with a jagged scar bisecting his face from brow to chin, Jeremiah Morton. Well, well, he drawled, removing his hat. If it isn't Eleanor Keene. Or do you call yourself something else these days? Sarah felt oddly calm as she moved behind the bar, putting solid oak between herself and the killers. Gentlemen, we don't open until noon, but I might make an exception given the weather. Jeremiah's lips curled in a humorless smile. Still playing games, Eleanor? After all these years. My name is Sarah Blackwood, she replied evenly. I think you have me confused with someone else. The youngest Morton brother, Ezekiel, if she remembered correctly, snorted. This the one who cut your face, Don't seem like much. Jeremiah ignored him, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. 8 years I've hunted you. 8 years wearing the mark you left. He moved closer to the bar. Where's my mother's locket? I don't know what you're talking about. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist and twisting it to reveal a thin white scar.
No mistake.
I'd know those eyes anywhere. The same eyes I see in the mirror every day when I remember what you took from me. From outside came the sudden sound of shouting. Men's voices, urgent and commanding. Boss, called the brother by the window. We got company. Looks like half the town armed out there. Jeremiah's grip tightened painfully. What did you do? Nothing, Sarah answered truthfully. But news travels fast in small towns. The standoff was interrupted by a child's scream from the back room. "Thomas!" Sarah gasped, trying to pull away. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "Who's Thomas?" Before she could answer, the back door burst open. Ezekiel Morton entered, dragging a struggling Thomas by the collar. Behind them, Hiram lay crumpled on the floor. "Look what I found trying to sneak away," Ezekiel announced. "A little spy." Sarah's heart plummeted. "Let him go. He has nothing to do with this." Jeremiah studied the boy, then Sarah, a slow smile spreading across his scarred face. "Well now, seems you've been busy these past years, Eleanor." He turned to Thomas. "What's your name, boy?" Thomas stopped struggling, his blue eyes burning with hatred. "Thomas Miller, and I know who you are. You killed my pa." Confusion flashed across Jeremiah's features. "Miller? Up north." He looked at his youngest brother. "Wasn't that the farmer who wouldn't sell his land?" Ezekiel finished. "Yeah, that was us." "Let the boy go," Sarah pleaded. "Your quarrel is with me." Jeremiah's attention returned to her, a calculating look in his eyes. "Seems we're at an impasse. You have something I want, and now," his gaze shifted to Thomas, "I have something you want." The front doors of the saloon crashed open. Marshal Davis stood framed in the doorway, rifle raised, flanked by several armed townsmen. "Drop your weapons, Morton," the marshal commanded. "You're surrounded." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jeremiah yanked Sarah against him, pressing a pistol to her temple. "Here's how this is going to play out," he called to the marshal. "My brothers and I are leaving with the woman. Anyone tries to stop us, she dies first, then the boy." Sarah caught Thomas's terrified gaze across the room. Something passed between them, understanding, resolve. "Wait," she said loudly. "There's another way." She looked directly at Jeremiah. "Let Thomas go, and I'll tell you where to find your mother's locket. It's worth more than you know." Curiosity flickered in Jeremiah's eyes. "Where?" "Not until the boy is safely with the marshal." A tense silence fell as Jeremiah weighed his options. Finally, he nodded to Ezekiel. "Let the brat go." The moment Thomas was released, he ran. Not to the marshal as expected, but straight to Sarah, throwing his arms around her waist despite Jeremiah's grip on her. "Brave boy," Jeremiah mocked. "Now, Eleanor, about that locket." Sarah looked down at Thomas, then back to the scarred face of the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 8 years. "It's in a bank box in Cheyenne," she said steadily. "But there's something about it you should know. Something about the picture inside." "What about it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's not your mother's portrait anymore. It's your brother Nathaniel's son." Jeremiah's pistol wavered. "Nathaniel never had a son." "He did," Sarah countered. "With my younger sister. The boy was born after I fled your house." "Liar," Jeremiah hissed, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Look at him," Sarah urged, glancing down at Thomas. "Really look. He has the Morton birthmark, the crescent moon behind his right ear, just like Nathaniel did." As if in a trance, Jeremiah pushed Thomas's hair aside, revealing the telltale mark. His face paled. "That's impossible," he whispered, but the gun in his hand lowered slightly. It was the opening Marshal Davis needed. A shot rang out, striking Jeremiah's shoulder. He staggered back, losing his grip on Sarah. Chaos erupted, gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking glass. Sarah grabbed Thomas, pulling him behind the bar as bullets splintered wood around them. "Hold on to me," she ordered, dragging him toward the trap door that led to the cellar. As she yanked it open, a shadow fell across them. Sarah looked up to see Ezekiel Morton, his gun aimed directly at her heart. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. A deafening blast filled the air. Ezekiel's expression transformed from rage to shock as he crumpled to the floor. Behind him stood Hiram, bleeding from a head wound but upright, Sarah's small pistol smoking in his hand. "Get down there," the old bartender urged. "I'll hold them off." Sarah didn't argue. She lifted Thomas into the dark cellar, following quickly behind him. "What's happening?" Thomas whispered, trembling against her in the darkness. "Did you mean what you said? About me being that man's nephew?" Sarah held him close, listening to the gunfire above. "No," she admitted softly. "But sometimes a lie that saves lives is better than a truth that takes them." The shooting intensified, then gradually fell silent. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above. "Miss Blackwood," Marshal Davis's voice called down. "It's over. You can come up now." Sarah climbed the ladder, helping Thomas up after her. The saloon was in ruins. Broken glass, splintered furniture, blood darkening the floorboards. 2 Morton brothers lay dead. Jeremiah and the 4th were nowhere to be seen. "The others?" Sarah asked hoarsely. "Escaped out the back," Davis answered grimly. "Jeremiah's wounded, but they'll be back. I'd bet my badge on it." Thomas's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "We have to run, don't we?" he asked, his young voice resigned to yet another displacement. Sarah looked around at the shattered remains of the life she'd built, then down at the boy who'd somehow become the center of it in just a few short weeks. "No," she said firmly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "No more running." She met Marshal Davis's questioning gaze. "We're going to fight." Blood dripped from Hiram's temple as he pressed a cloth against the wound. Outside the shattered windows of the Bucking Bronco Saloon, a spring storm gathered, dark clouds mirroring the mood inside. Marshal Davis moved between injured townsmen, checking wounds and offering words of encouragement. "Never seen shooting like that," muttered Henderson, sweeping broken glass. "For men against a dozen, and they still managed to escape." Sarah barely heard him. Her focus remained on Thomas, who sat wrapped in a blanket by the stove, his young face pale with shock. Just hours ago, he'd been caught in a gunfight. Just hours ago, he'd learned that the men who'd murdered his father were hunting the woman who'd been feeding him. "He needs rest," Sarah told Davis as he approached. "Somewhere away from here." The marshal nodded, his weathered face grave. "My office has a back room. It's not much, but it's the safest place in town right now." "I ain't leaving," Thomas declared, his voice small but firm. "Not without Miss Sarah." Davis crouched before the boy. "Son, those men will be back, and they'll come here first. Miss Sarah needs to know you're safe." Thomas's jaw set stubbornly. "They killed my pa. Now they want to kill her too. I stay." The simple loyalty pierced Sarah's heart. She knelt beside him, gently taking his hands. "Thomas, listen. Marshal Davis is right. This isn't your fight." "You made it mine," the boy replied, meeting her gaze with eyes far older than his years. "When you fed me, when you cared when nobody else did." A memory flashed her own childhood, the bitter taste of hunger, the colder taste of abandonment. She recognized in Thomas the same desperate need to matter to someone, anyone. "All right," she conceded, surprising herself. "But you stay with me, and you do exactly as I say. Understand?" He nodded solemnly. Davis didn't look pleased, but he didn't argue. "We need to move you both. The saloon's too obvious." "We can use my place," offered Henderson. "It's behind the telegraph office. Small but 2 rooms. And nobody would think to look there." As they gathered what little they needed, Hiram pulled Sarah aside. The old bartender's eyes were clearer than she'd ever seen them, free from their usual roomy haze. "That boy," he said quietly, nodding toward Thomas. "He looks at you like you hung the moon, like I once looked at my mother." Sarah had no answer for that. The weight of such trust felt heavier than any burden she'd carried in her years of running. Rain began to fall as they slipped out the back door, hurrying through muddy alleys toward Henderson's small quarters. Thomas kept pace beside Sarah, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Will they really come back?" he whispered. "Yes," Sarah answered honestly. "Jeremiah Morton doesn't give up easily." "Because of the locket?" Sarah hesitated. The locket was real enough. A silver oval containing a portrait of Catherine Morton that Sarah had indeed stolen during her flight from the estate. but its significance was far more personal than monetary. Partly, she allowed, but mostly because of me, because I wounded his pride. They reached Henderson's rooms without incident. The space was cramped but clean. A small sitting area with a wood stove, a tiny bedroom, shelves crammed with books. "It's not much," Henderson apologized, lighting lamps against the gathering gloom. "It's perfect," Sarah assured him. As Henderson departed to maintain appearances at the telegraph office, Davis secured the door and windows. "I'll post men nearby," he told Sarah, "but stay away from the windows." When they were alone, Thomas finally asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Why did you lie about me being that man's nephew?" She sat beside him on Henderson's worn sofa, choosing her words carefully. "Because I needed to confuse him, to create doubt. Men like Jeremiah Morton don't expect the unexpected." Thomas absorbed this. "So I'm not special?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "If I was his nephew, I'd be important. Worth something." His voice dropped. "Just a regular orphan ain't worth much to anyone." Sarah's throat tightened. "Thomas Miller, look at me." When he raised his eyes, she continued fiercely, "Your worth isn't decided by who your family is or isn't. It's decided by who you choose to be, every single day." "And who am I choosing to be?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Brave," she said without hesitation. "Loyal. Kind enough to care whether an old bartender got hurt defending you. Smart enough to recognize dangerous men. Those things make you special, Thomas. Those things make you worth everything." The sincerity in her voice seemed to reach him. He nodded slowly, some color returning to his face. "Miss Sarah." "Yes. If we get out of this, could I stay with you? Not just eating at the back door, but stay? I can work. I'm strong." The question pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses. For 8 years, she'd avoided attachments, knowing they made running harder. Yet here was this boy offering a different kind of future, one where she stopped running altogether. Before she could answer, a sharp rap at the door startled them both. Davis entered, his expression grim. "Spotted fresh tracks heading north," he reported. "2 horses moving fast. Could be Jeremiah and Luke." "You think they've left?" Sarah asked skeptically. Davis shook his head. "More likely gathering reinforcements. Word is the Morton gang has friends in the mining camps north of here." The implications settled heavily. A day, maybe 2, before they returned with greater numbers. Against which Cottonwood Creek had a part-time sheriff who preferred cards to confrontation, a traveling marshal, and a handful of townsmen with hunting rifles. "We need to prepare," Davis continued. "Teach folks to shoot straight, set up defenses. Or," Sarah suggested quietly, "Thomas and I could leave, draw them away from town." Davis's face hardened. "Running again, Miss Blackwood?" "Being practical," she countered. "This isn't Cottonwood Creek's fight. It became our fight when they shot up our saloon and wounded our people," Davis replied firmly. "Besides, how far do you think you'd get with a child? Jeremiah would hunt you down within days." He was right, and Sarah knew it. The pattern of running, hiding, being found, running again, it couldn't continue forever, especially not with Thomas. "There's another option," Davis said after a moment. "Something Jeremiah wouldn't expect." "What's that?" Sarah asked warily. "We take the fight to him." Thomas, who had been listening intently, perked up. "Like an ambush?" Davis nodded. "Exactly like that. Instead of waiting for him to attack with reinforcements, we find him first. Tonight." The boldness of the plan startled Sarah. "Just the 2 of us?" "3, Thomas interjected. "I'm coming too." "Absolutely not," Sarah and Davis said in unison. But the boy stood his ground. "I know what he looks like. I can track better than most men had to survive after Pa died. And," he hesitated, then squared his shoulders, "and I have a right. He killed my family. Now he wants to kill my friend." The word seemed inadequate for what they'd become to each other, but neither corrected it. Davis studied Thomas thoughtfully. "The boy has a point about tracking. And we'd need to move fast, travel light. He's 7 years old, Sarah protested. Almost 8, Thomas countered. Old enough to load a rifle, Davis observed. Old enough to have survived on his own for months. Sarah felt herself being outmaneuvered by male logic, however flawed. And if we find the Mortons? What then? Davis's expression grew solemn. Then justice is served. One way or another. As the storm intensified outside, the 3 unlikely allies formed their plan. North toward the mining camps under cover of darkness. Find the Mortons before they gathered reinforcements. End the threat once and for all. By midnight, they were ready. Davis with his rifle, Sarah with her small pistol, Thomas with a determined glint in his eye and knowledge of the mountain paths no map could provide. Before they left Henderson's quarters, Sarah pulled Thomas aside. About your question earlier, she said softly. If we get through this, yes, you can stay with me, for as long as you want. The smile that bloomed across his face outshone the lightning flashing beyond the windows. A promise of something beyond survival. Something like home. They went this way, Thomas whispered, crouching to examine crushed foliage barely visible in the pre-dawn light. 2 horses, one limping. The wounded ones leaving a deeper print on the right side. Marshal Davis nodded appreciatively. The boy knows his tracking. Rain had given way to mist that clung to the pines and aspens flanking the narrow mountain trail. They'd been traveling for hours, following the faint trail left by Jeremiah and Luke Morton as they fled north from Cottonwood Creek. Sarah watched Thomas with a mixture of pride and concern. The boy moved through the wilderness with the quiet confidence of someone raised in its shadows. Each time he proved Davis right about his tracking skills, the marshal shot Sarah a look that clearly said, "Told you so." "How much further to the mining camps?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice low despite the empty forest around them. 3-4 hours if we keep this pace, Davis replied, scanning the ridgeline above. Rough country ahead. Thomas rose from his examination of the tracks. They stopped here. See, he pointed to circular depressions in the soft earth. Dismounted. Talked a while, judging by these boot prints going back and forth. Arguing, maybe, Davis mused, disagreeing about their next move. Sarah studied the area. Could they have split up? Let's see. Thomas moved in a widening circle, eyes fixed on the ground. Suddenly he froze. Yes, one horse went that way. He pointed east, toward a steeper trail. The other kept north. Davis cursed under his breath. Complicates things. Or simplifies them, Sarah suggested. Divide and weaken. The marshal considered this. Which track is fresher, son? Thomas examined both trails carefully. The northern one. And it's the limping horse, Jeremiah's, most likely, since he was wounded. Then we follow Jeremiah, Davis decided. He's the head of the snake. They continued through thinning mist as dawn strengthened around them. The trail climbed steadily, skirting steep drops where mountain slopes fell away to rocky valleys below. Sarah's city-bred legs ached with the effort, but she pressed on without complaint. Near a stream crossing, Davis raised his hand, signaling a halt. Listen, he whispered. At first, Sarah heard nothing beyond water rushing over stone. Then, faintly, the rhythmic thud of an axe striking wood. Woodcutter? She suggested. Davis shook his head. This far out? Not likely. He turned to Thomas. You stay with Miss Sarah. I'm going to scout ahead.
No, Thomas protested.
I'm the tracker. I should go. Thomas, Sarah began. He's right, Davis interrupted. The boy moves quieter than either of us, and he knows what he's looking for. He fixed Thomas with a stern look. But you look only. If you spot Morton, you come straight back. Understood. Thomas nodded solemnly. We'll wait here, Davis continued. If you're not back in 10 minutes, we'll come after you. Be careful. They watched as Thomas slipped into the underbrush with barely a sound, moving toward the source of the chopping. You think this is wise? Sarah asked quietly. Not particularly, Davis admitted. But that boy has survived worse than this reconnaissance. He's tougher than he looks. He shouldn't have to be, Sarah said, a trace of bitterness in her voice. Davis studied her thoughtfully. No, he shouldn't. Neither should you have had to run for 8 years. But here we are, making the best of what life's dealt us. 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then 10. Something's wrong, Sarah said, rising from her crouched position. He should be back by now. Davis checked his pocket watch and snapped it closed with a grim expression. Let's go. Move quietly. They followed the direction Thomas had taken, Davis leading with his rifle ready. The sound of chopping had ceased, replaced by an ominous silence. They emerged into a small clearing where a crude lean-to had been constructed against a rocky outcropping. A freshly cut pile of firewood stood nearby. Of Thomas, there was no sign. Check the shelter, Davis murmured, moving to examine the perimeter. Sarah approached the lean-to cautiously. Inside, she found a bedroll, provisions, and signs of recent occupation, but no boy. His horse is here, Davis called softly from the edge of the clearing. Jeremiah's definitely been here. Fear clutched at Sarah's throat. Thomas, she called, abandoning caution. Thomas, where are you? Miss Sarah. The response came from above. They both looked up to see Thomas perched in a pine tree overlooking the clearing, grinning triumphantly. What are you doing up there? Sarah demanded as he scrambled down with monkey-like agility. Keeping watch, Thomas explained. It's Morton's camp all right, but he's gone. Packed up most of his things about an hour ago, I'd guess. Gone where? Davis asked sharply. Thomas pointed north. That way, but there's something else. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Found this pinned to a tree with a hunting knife. Davis unfolded the paper, his expression darkening as he read. Wordlessly, he handed it to Sarah. The note, written in a surprisingly elegant hand, read, Eleanor Keene, alias Sarah Blackwood. 8 years I've hunted you. 8 years carrying the mark of your betrayal on my face. Did you think a few bullets would end this reckoning? I know about the boy now. Thomas Miller orphaned by my hand. Fitting that he found his way to you. 2 strays circling the same fire. You have something that belongs to my family. I have something that belongs to yours. The old Chinese mine at Wolf Peak. Midnight. Come alone with the locket, or Hiram dies as slowly as my patience has. J.M. Sarah's blood ran cold. Hiram? But we just left him in town. He must have sent Luke back, Davis reasoned. Took Hiram while we were preparing to leave. His jaw tightened. My fault. I should have posted more men. We have to go back, Sarah insisted. We have to help him. Davis shook his head. Wolf Peak is closer from here than Cottonwood Creek is. 2 hours ride, maybe less. Going back would waste precious time. But the note says midnight, Thomas pointed out. That's hours away. Time enough to set a trap, Davis said grimly. Or walk into one, Sarah countered. He's expecting me to come alone. And if you do, you'll die, Davis stated flatly. Along with Hiram, most likely. Sarah knew he was right. Jeremiah's thirst for vengeance wouldn't be satisfied with just the locket. He wanted her to suffer first, to beg, perhaps even to watch as he killed those she cared about. Wolf Peak, she murmured, trying to recall what she knew of the area. The old Chinese mine was abandoned years ago, wasn't it? After the cave-in that killed those workers. Davis nodded. Locals say it's haunted. Nobody goes there anymore. Perfect place for an ambush, Thomas observed with a child's chilling pragmatism. They gathered what supplies they could from Jeremiah's abandoned camp and set off toward Wolf Peak. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, the trail narrowing as it wound between rocky cliffs. In places, they were forced to dismount and lead the horses along treacherous sections. By mid-afternoon, the distinctive formation of Wolf Peak loomed before them, a jagged crown of stone resembling a wolf's head in profile. At its base, barely visible among scrub growth, stood the collapsed entrance to the mine. We should scout the area, Davis suggested as they secured their horses in a sheltered gully. Find out what we're dealing with before dark. Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were with Hiram. The old bartender had become more than an employer over her 4 years in Cottonwood Creek. He'd become a friend, perhaps the closest thing to family she'd allowed herself since fleeing the Morton estate. He took Hiram because of me, she said quietly. Just like he killed Thomas's father. That's not on you, Davis insisted. Jeremiah Morton has left a trail of bodies across 3 territories. The man's a monster, plain and simple. A monster I created, Sarah replied, when I marked his face. Thomas, who had been scouting ahead, returned with news. There's a ridge above the mine entrance. Good view of anyone approaching. And I found a back way in, a gap in the rocks where the ceiling collapsed. It's small, but I can fit through. Davis's eyebrows rose. You're not going in there alone. Not planning to, Thomas assured him. Just saying I found it. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, the 3 settled into a sheltered position overlooking the mine. Davis checked and rechecked his rifle. Sarah kept her small pistol close, though she knew her shots were unreliable at best. Thomas watched everything with solemn intensity, absorbing each detail as if committing it to memory. What if Hiram isn't here? Sarah asked suddenly. What if this is just a ruse to draw us away from town? Then we deal with Jeremiah Morton regardless, Davis replied. End this chase once and for all. As shadows lengthened across the rocky terrain, Sarah found herself studying Thomas's profile, the determined set of his jaw, the keen intelligence in his eyes. So young to be caught in such violence. So young to understand revenge. Thomas, she said softly, if anything happens tonight, I want you to run. Get back to town. Find Henderson. He'll keep you safe. The boy shook his head stubbornly. I'm not leaving you. This isn't your fight, Sarah insisted. Thomas's blue eyes met hers directly. You made it mine when you cared, he said, echoing his words from earlier. Nobody gets to hurt my family. Not again. Family. The word hung between them, simple yet profound. In the space of a few weeks, they'd become something neither had dared hope for. People who belonged to each other, by choice rather than blood. Riders, Davis hissed, breaking the moment. Coming up the trail. They flattened themselves against the rocky ground, peering cautiously over the ridge. 2 figures on horseback approached the mine entrance. One was unmistakably Jeremiah Morton, his tall frame unmistakable even in the fading light. The other, slumped forward and apparently bound to his saddle, could only be Hiram. Luke's not with them, Thomas whispered. But I bet he's nearby. Davis nodded grimly. Probably already in position. They watched as Jeremiah dismounted and roughly pulled Hiram from the saddle. The old bartender stumbled, fell to his knees. Even from a distance, they could see blood staining his shirt. I'm going down there, Sarah declared, her voice tight with anger. Davis caught her arm. Not yet. We need to locate Luke first. Otherwise you're walking into crossfire. Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly, to think past the rage boiling inside her. Jeremiah was dragging Hiram toward the mine entrance, disappearing into the yawning darkness beyond. We need to split up, Davis decided. I'll circle around, try to flush out Luke. You 2 stay here until you see my signal. What's the signal? Thomas asked. You'll know it when you see it, Davis replied grimly, checking his rifle one last time. If anything goes wrong, you run. Both of you. Understood. Sarah and Thomas nodded reluctantly. As Davis slipped away into the gathering dusk, Sarah felt time slow to an excruciating crawl. Minutes stretched like hours. The mine entrance remained dark and silent. No sign of Luke. No signal from Davis. Something's wrong, Thomas whispered finally. It's been too long. Sarah had to agree. We need to move closer. See what's happening. They crept down from their position, staying low and using the scattered boulders for cover. The mine entrance loomed before them, a black mouth in the mountainside. No sound came from within. I should check the back way, Thomas suggested. The gap I found.
No, Sarahist.
We stay together. A sudden gunshot shattered the silence, its echo bouncing between the rocky walls surrounding them. It had come from inside the mine. Hiram! Sarah gasped, abandoning caution and running toward the entrance. Miss Sarah, wait! Thomas called, but she was already plunging into the darkness, her fear for Hiram overwhelming all else. The mine tunnel sloped downward, timbers groaning overhead as Sarah stumbled forward. What little light penetrated from the entrance quickly faded, leaving her in near-total darkness. She slowed, blinking furiously, trying to force her eyes to adjust. Hiram? She called softly. Marshall Davis? A match flared somewhere ahead, illuminating a grotesque tableau. Hiram knelt on the tunnel floor, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Behind him stood Jeremiah Morton, holding the match with one hand and a pistol to Hiram's head with the other. Of Davis there was no sign. Right on time, Eleanor, Jeremiah drawled. Or do you prefer Sarah now? Let him go, Sarah demanded, her pistol raised despite knowing she'd be unlikely to hit Jeremiah in the dim light. Your quarrel is with me. Oh, it is? Jeremiah agreed, the match casting sinister shadows across his scarred face. But you see, I've developed a taste for hurting those you care about. The farmer, the old man. Next, perhaps, will be the boy. Ice formed in Sarah's veins. If you've harmed Thomas. Not yet, Jeremiah interrupted. But Luke is very eager to meet him, once he finishes with your Marshall friend. Another gunshot echoed, this one from outside the mine. Sarah's heart lurched. The locket, Jeremiah demanded, pressing his pistol harder against Hiram's temple. Where is it? Sarah reached into her pocket, withdrawing the silver oval. Here, take it and go. Jeremiah laughed, a sound without humor. Oh, Eleanor, did you really think this was just about a trinket? He nodded toward the locket. Slide it over. Slowly, Sarah placed the locket on the ground and pushed it toward him. It skittered across the rocky floor, coming to rest at Jeremiah's feet. As he bent to retrieve it, a small figure darted from the shadows behind him. Thomas, who must have found his way in through the back entrance. The boy's hand flashed out, striking Jeremiah's wounded shoulder with precise aim. The outlaw howled in pain, his pistol discharging wildly into the ceiling. Dust and small rocks rained down as the impact loosened the already unstable timbers. Run! Sarah shouted as Hiram staggered to his feet. The old bartender lurched toward her as Thomas darted past Jeremiah, who was still reeling from the surprise attack. Together, they stumbled toward the mine entrance as the tunnel began to shudder ominously around them. A larger crack sounded above. Not a gunshot this time, but the groan of timbers giving way. The ceiling was collapsing. Faster, Sarah urged, pulling Thomas along as Hiram struggled to keep pace. Behind them, Jeremiah's rage-filled shouts turned to panicked cries as the tunnel began to cave in. Light appeared ahead, the entrance now partially blocked by falling debris. With a final desperate lunge, they burst into the open air just as the mine entrance collapsed completely behind them. Dust billowed outward, enveloping them in a choking cloud. When it cleared, they found Davis kneeling over a motionless body, Luke Morton, a bullet hole in his chest. Came at me from the ridge, Davis explained through a bloody lip. Nearly got the drop on me. Jeremiah, Sarah asked, still gasping for breath. Davis glanced at the now sealed mine entrance. In there, Sarah nodded grimly. A muffled scream emerged from within the collapsed tunnel, quickly silenced by the sound of more falling rock. Thomas shivered against Sarah's side. Is it over now? Really over? Sarah pulled him close, looking from his dirt-streaked face to Hiram's wounded but living form, to Davis's battered but triumphant expression. Yes, she said softly, feeling the weight of 8 years lifting from her shoulders. It's over. As the stars emerged above Wolf Peak, for weary figures began the long journey back to Cottonwood Creek. Behind them, the old Chinese mine had claimed its final victims. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also, perhaps, a chance to stop running and start living. For Sarah Blackwood, once Eleanor Keene, That possibility felt like dawn breaking after an endless night. "You can't keep him," Sheriff Rollins declared, tossing Sarah's carefully prepared guardianship papers onto his desk. "Town orphans one thing. Taking in the son of a man murdered by outlaws you were mixed up with? That's asking for trouble." 2 weeks had passed since the cave-in at Wolf Peak. 2 weeks of recovery, rebuilding, and whispers following Sarah through Cottonwood Creek. News traveled fast in small settlements, especially news about a barmaid's hidden past. Sarah stood her ground, hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "Thomas has nowhere else to go. Orphanage in Cheyenne would take him," Rollins countered, leaning back in his creaking chair. His pudgy fingers drummed against his vest. "Boy that age, strong and clever. They'd find him a placement quick enough." The mere mention of an orphanage sent ice through Sarah's veins. "No," she said firmly. "He stays with me." Across the sheriff's office, Thomas sat quietly on a wooden bench. Though he pretended to examine a wanted poster on the wall, Sarah knew he absorbed every word. A child who'd survived alone in the wilderness missed nothing. "Miss Blackwood," Rollins sighed, using her assumed name with obvious distaste. "Let's speak plainly. You've been lying about who you are for years. Eleanor Keene, wasn't it? Mixed up with the Morton gang somehow." "I was never mixed up with them," Sarah replied evenly. "I worked for their family. Jeremiah Morton attacked me. I defended myself and fled, marking a man's face for life in the process," Rollins observed. "Don't sound like no innocent housekeeper to me." Thomas slid off the bench and moved to Sarah's side, his small hand finding hers. The simple gesture of support steadied her. "Sheriff," she said, measuring each word, "I've lived in Cottonwood Creek for 4 years. In that time, have I ever caused trouble? Have I ever broken the law?" Rollins shifted uncomfortably. "Not that I know of." "Then why should my guardianship of Thomas be denied? He has no family. I have means to support him. We care for each other. Share." Nathaniel wasn't the only Morton who survived. Their mother, Catherine, is alive as well. They've been living in Canada under assumed names since Henry Morton's death. Thomas absorbed this, remembering the locket that had started everything, the portrait of Catherine Morton that Sarah had stolen all those years ago. Why come back now? With Jeremiah dead, they're safe. "That's the complicated part," Sarah replied. "Apparently, there's more to the Morton estate than anyone realized. Property, investments, business holdings, all tied up in legal knots after Henry's death and Jeremiah's criminal activities. With Jeremiah gone, Catherine wants to reclaim what's rightfully hers. But she needs witnesses, documentation. And you have some of that," Thomas guessed. Sarah nodded. "Letters. Papers I took the night I fled. I thought they might protect me if Jeremiah ever caught up to me. I never read them all. Just enough to know they were important." "So Nathaniel wants these papers?" "Yes. And in exchange, he's offering." Sarah took a deep breath. "A substantial sum. Enough to secure our future, Thomas. Enough that we'd never have to worry again." Thomas considered this. "Do you trust him?" "Not entirely," Sarah admitted, echoing Nathaniel's earlier words. "But Marshall Davis has been making inquiries. So far, Nathaniel's story checks out. Catherine Morton has indeed surfaced in Cheyenne, working with lawyers to reclaim the family holdings." "What if it's a trick?" Thomas pressed. "What if they're just like Jeremiah?" Sarah shook her head. "Nathaniel opposed his brother. That's why he died in that bank robbery. Jeremiah tried to have him killed when he threatened to expose the truth about Henry's death." Her expression grew distant. "Besides, I knew Nathaniel slightly during my time at the Morton estate. He was different. Kinda." Thomas wasn't entirely convinced, but he trusted Sarah's judgment. She'd survived Jeremiah Morton's obsessive hunt for years. She wouldn't be easily deceived by another member of the same family. "Are you going to do it?" he asked. "Give him the papers?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I want your opinion first. This affects both of us. Our family." The word family still sent a warm glow through Thomas's chest every time Sarah used it. To be consulted, to have his thoughts matter in such an adult decision. It granted him a dignity few children his age experienced. "I think," he said slowly, "that we should meet with them both, Catherine and Nathaniel. See them face to face before deciding." Sarah smiled, pride evident in her expression. "That's exactly what Marshall Davis suggested. Great minds think alike, it seems." Thomas grinned at the comparison, then sobered. "When?" "Tomorrow," Sarah replied. "They're staying at the hotel under different names." Davis arranged a private meeting in the back room of Henderson's telegraph office. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "And the mountain lion? Is that real? Or just an excuse for the marshal to warn everyone to be careful while Mortons are in town?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. "You're becoming quite the detective." "It's real enough. Miller's farm lost 2 sheep last week." "But yes, the timing of the announcement wasn't coincidental." As darkness gathered outside their windows, Sarah prepared a simple supper while Thomas set the table. Domestic rituals still new enough to feel special rather than routine. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics: the saloon's business, Thomas's progress in school, plans for the approaching Christmas season. It wasn't until they were washing dishes that Thomas returned to the day's revelations. "If the Mortons pay you," he asked carefully, "what will you do? Will we leave Cottonwood Creek?" Sarah looked surprised by the question. "Do you want to leave?" Thomas considered this. When he'd first started receiving food from Sarah's hands, he'd had no concept of belonging anywhere. Survival had been his only goal. Now, however, "No," he said firmly. "This is home now." Sarah's face softened. "I agree. Whatever happens with the Mortons, we stay. This is where we've planted our roots." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "And Marshall Davis? Will he stay too?" A delicate flush colored Sarah's cheeks. "The marshal's postings are determined by territorial authorities, not by his personal preferences." "But he has personal preferences," Thomas persisted, remembering Davis's increasingly frequent visits for supper, the way his gaze followed Sarah when he thought no one was looking. "This conversation has taken a rather impertinent turn," Sarah observed, though her lips twitched with suppressed amusement. Thomas grinned, recognizing the deflection for what it was. Adults could be remarkably transparent when it came to matters of the heart, especially to a child who'd learned to read subtle cues as a matter of survival. Later, as Sarah tucked him into bed, Thomas returned to a question that had been niggling at him since the cemetery. "Miss Sarah, do you think people can change? Really change?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I believe they can choose different paths," she said finally. "Whether that constitutes true change depends on their reasons, I suppose. Like Nathaniel choosing a different path than Jeremiah? Possibly." Sarah smoothed his blanket. "We'll learn more tomorrow." As she moved to extinguish the lamp, Thomas asked one last question. "Are you afraid of seeing them again? People connected to the Mortons?" Sarah paused, her hand on the lamp's key. "Not afraid," she said thoughtfully. "Cautious. But mostly, I'm ready for this chapter to truly end. For us to move forward without shadows from the past." The lamp dimmed, casting the room in gentle darkness. Through his window, Thomas could see snowflakes still falling, each unique crystal part of a larger pattern blanketing the world in clean white possibility. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation with the past, both Sarah's and his own. But tonight, in this home they'd built together, Thomas Miller Blackwood felt something he'd nearly forgotten existed. Safety, born not from the absence of danger, but from the presence of love. Catherine Morton's silver locket caught the morning sunlight as it dangled from her fingers, spinning slowly like a hypnotist's watch. 2 months had passed since the Wolf Peak mine collapse that had supposedly claimed Jeremiah's life. 2 months of cautious peace in Cottonwood Creek. "You should have this back," Catherine said, offering the locket to Sarah. "You earned it, after everything my son put you through." They sat on the front porch of Sarah and Thomas's new home, a modest cabin James Davis had helped build on the outskirts of town. Inside, Thomas's laughter mingled with the marshal's deep voice as they prepared breakfast together. Sarah shook her head, refusing the trinket. "It belongs with your family." "As does Thomas," Catherine replied softly. The reminder hung between them. The shocking revelation that had come after DNA testing confirmed what Catherine had suspected upon seeing the boy. Thomas was indeed Nathaniel Morton's biological son, conceived during a brief affair with a kitchen maid who'd later become Mrs. Miller. The birthmark behind his ear that Sarah had invented for her desperate lie had turned out to be real, a genetic quirk passed down through Morton men for generations. "He has a family," Sarah answered carefully. "Here, with me and James." Catherine nodded, slipping the locket back into her pocket. "I'm not trying to take him from you, Sarah. I only thought he might want to know his blood relatives. His heritage." "His heritage?" Sarah repeated, an edge creeping into her voice. "The Morton legacy of violence and cruelty? Jeremiah murdering his own father? Luke gunning down innocent farmers? That heritage?" "No," Catherine flinched. "Nathaniel wasn't like his brothers. He was gentle, kind. Thomas has his eyes, and his curiosity." Sarah gazed toward the open window, where Thomas was excitedly describing to James his latest adventure, exploring the creek that ran behind their property. 8 years old now, he had blossomed in these months of security. Curious, cheerful, no longer the wary creature she'd first encountered in that alley. "You're leaving soon?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "Tomorrow." Catherine smoothed her skirts, finer quality than anything seen in Cottonwood Creek, a reminder of the wealth that had enabled her escape to Canada years ago. "My business in Cheyenne is finished. The courts have finally untangled the Morton estate. Most will go to victims of Jeremiah's crimes. And some to Thomas?" Sarah guessed shrewdly. Catherine smiled. "A trust. For his education when he's older. If he wants it." The cabin door opened as James emerged with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Ladies," he greeted, handing them each a cup. "Beautiful morning." It was indeed. Wyoming summer in full glory, wildflowers dotting the meadow beyond their yard, mountains rising purple-blue against a cloudless sky. The kind of morning that made Sarah's years of running seem like a distant nightmare. "The stage leaves at noon," James reminded Catherine. "I'll drive you to the depot after breakfast." "Thank you, Marshal." Catherine sipped her coffee, her gaze wandering to the distant mountains. "Hard to believe it's over. All of it." Sarah wished she could share the older woman's certainty. But something had been nagging at her these past weeks. A persistent doubt she couldn't quite shake. "James," she said carefully, "has there been any word from the territorial mine inspector? About remains?" The marshal's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing conclusive. The collapse was extensive. Might never be a proper recovery." Catherine set down her cup with a faint clink. "You think my son survived, don't you?" "I think Jeremiah Morton has cheated death before," Sarah replied. "I think until I see his body with my own eyes, I'll keep looking over my shoulder." James's hand found hers warm and reassuring. "No one could have survived that cave-in, Sarah. We all heard the final collapse." "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, but the doubt remained. A cold knot in her stomach that not even the summer sun could warm. Thomas bounded onto the porch, a streak of soap still visible on one cheek. "Breakfast's ready. I made flapjacks all by myself, except for the flipping part." His innocent pride dispelled the somber mood. Catherine smiled warmly at him, careful to maintain the fiction that she was merely an old friend of Sarah's from back east. They had agreed, all 3 adults, that Thomas had endured enough upheaval. The truth about his parentage could wait until he was older, better able to understand its complexities. "I hear you're quite the explorer," Catherine said as they moved inside to the table laden with slightly misshapen but golden-brown flapjacks. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "I'm mapping the whole creek, and the woods too." "Pa." He stopped, glancing uncertainly at James. "I mean, Marshal Davis is teaching me to read a compass." "You can call me Pa, son," James said gently. "If that feels right to you." The boy's face lit up. "Really? Even though we're not truly family yet?" Sarah exchanged a look with James. They hadn't told Thomas about their plans to marry at summer's end, nor about the adoption papers currently being processed in the territorial court. Actually, Sarah began, we have news. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her. Henderson stood on the threshold, his normally placid face etched with concern. Marshall, he said breathlessly, you're needed in town, urgently. James rose immediately. What's happened? Henderson glanced nervously at Thomas. Best discussed privately, sir. The adults exchanged worried looks. Thomas, Sarah said quickly, why don't you show Catherine your map of the creek while we talk to Mr. Henderson? The boy looked disappointed but complied, leading Catherine to the small desk in the corner where his carefully drawn maps were proudly displayed. Outside on the porch, Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. Hiram found something at the saloon this morning, left on the back step. From his pocket, he withdrew a folded piece of paper. James opened it, his face darkening as he read the few lines written there. Wordlessly, he handed it to Sarah. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same elegant script that had been on the note at Wolf Peak. Contained just 5 words. Did you miss me, Eleanor? Sarah's legs nearly buckled. James caught her arm, steadying her. Could be a cruel joke, Henderson suggested without conviction. Someone who knows the story. It's not, Sarah replied, her voice hollow. He's alive. He's come back. We don't know that, James insisted, but his hand moved instinctively to his gun belt. Henderson, get back to town. Alert Sheriff Rollins. I want men watching all approaches to Cottonwood Creek. What about Sarah and the boy? Henderson asked. James's jaw tightened. They're coming with me. Nobody's safe out here alone. Inside, Catherine had evidently sensed the tension. She was helping Thomas gather his maps, her aristocratic composure betrayed only by the slight tremor in her hands. What's wrong? Thomas asked immediately, too perceptive to be fooled by adult pretense. Sarah forced a smile. Nothing serious. Just some trouble in town that Marshall Davis needs to handle. Are we going too? Yes, James answered before Sarah could respond. Just for a day or two. Think of it as an adventure. Thomas wasn't convinced, but he began packing his treasured possessions without further question. A child accustomed to sudden departures. As they loaded the wagon, Catherine pulled Sarah aside. It's him, isn't it? Jeremiah. Sarah nodded grimly. James thinks we'll be safer in town. You won't be safe anywhere, Catherine replied, her voice hard with certainty. Not while Jeremiah draws breath. His hatred is pathological. It consumes him. What would you have me do? Sarah asked, fighting to keep panic from her voice. Run again? Drag Thomas from place to place? Always looking over my shoulder. Catherine reached into her reticule, withdrawing a small Derringer pistol. Take this. The next time you see my son, don't hesitate. End it for good. The wagon journey to town passed in tense silence, Thomas sensing enough danger to remain quiet, watching the passing landscape with wary eyes. Sarah held him close, the small pistol a heavy presence in her pocket. Cottonwood Creek had changed in the months since the Morton gang's attack. New buildings had risen, including a proper schoolhouse where Thomas had just started attending. The Bucking Bronco Saloon had been rebuilt, its new facade boasting fresh paint and actual glass windows. It was to the saloon they went first. Hiram met them at the door, his weathered face grim. Wasn't just the note, the old bartender said without preamble. Someone's been watching the place. Edna from the millinery saw a stranger hanging around the back alley before dawn. Description, James asked tersely. Tall man, face half hidden by a scarf. Despite the summer heat, the disguise would conceal Jeremiah's distinctive scar, a logical precaution in a town where his face was well known. Where's the safest place in town? Sarah asked, instinctively pulling Thomas closer. My office has a secure back room, James replied. Used as a jail cell when needed but solid. One door, barred windows. Sheriff Rollins joined them, looking distinctly uncomfortable. His card-playing and general neglect of duty had become a point of shame after the Morton incident revealed how vulnerable the town had been. "Got men watching every road in and out," he reported, straightening his badge self-importantly. "Nobody's seen anything suspicious." "He's already here," Sarah said with quiet certainty. "Watching. Waiting." James's hand tightened on his rifle. "Then let him come. This time we'll make sure he doesn't walk away." They moved quickly to the marshal's office, a sturdy stone building that served as both jail and territorial law headquarters. The back room was indeed solid, a single iron-barred door, small windows set high in the wall with similar fortification. "It's not the territorial hotel," James apologized as he arranged blankets on the narrow cot. "But you'll be safe here." Thomas explored the confined space with the adaptability of youth. "It's like a fort," he declared, finding an unexpected positive in their situation. "We can defend it against outlaws." The boy's resilience brought a lump to Sarah's throat. After everything he'd endured, he still found ways to transform fear into adventure. As evening approached, the town grew quiet. James positioned himself in the outer office, rifle across his lap, while Sheriff Rollins organized patrols of armed townsmen. Catherine had been escorted to the hotel, despite her protests that she should stay with Sarah and Thomas. "Try to sleep," Sarah urged Thomas as she tucked him into the cot. "Everything will look better in the morning." "Is the bad man really back?" Thomas asked, his voice small in the dimness. "The one with the scar?" Sarah hesitated, torn between protection and honesty. "We don't know for certain, but if he is, we're ready this time." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I'm not scared," he declared, though his hand clutched hers tightly. "Not when you and Pa are here." "Pa." The word came more naturally to him each time. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. Some bonds couldn't be broken, not even by the threat of violence. "Sleep now," she whispered, smoothing his hair. "I'll be right here." Hours passed. Thomas's breathing deepened into sleep. In the outer office, James maintained his vigilant watch. Street sounds faded as Cottonwood Creek settled into night. Too restless for sleep, Sarah moved to the small window, standing on tiptoe to peer through the bars. The alley behind the jail lay in deep shadow, illuminated only by slivers of moonlight between buildings. First, she saw nothing. Then, a movement, a deeper darkness shifting against the shadows. A figure stood perfectly still, watching the jail. Watching her. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't make out features, couldn't be certain. But something in the figure's posture, the patient stillness of a predator. "James," she called softly, desperate not to wake Thomas. "There's someone in the alley." The marshal was at her side instantly, peering through the window. "Where?" But the figure had vanished, melting into the darkness as silently as it had appeared. "There was someone," Sarah insisted, "watching us." James believed her. She could see it in his eyes. "Stay here. Bar the door behind me. You can't go out there alone." "I'm not chasing shadows," he assured her. "Just checking the perimeter. 5 minutes, no more." Reluctantly, Sarah secured the door after him, the heavy iron bar sliding into place with a sound that was both reassuring and eerily final. She returned to the window, straining to see into the darkness. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10. No sign of James. Fear bubbled up, threatening to overwhelm her. Had Jeremiah lured him away? Set a trap? A soft scratching at the door nearly stopped her heart. "Sarah?" James's voice, barely audible. "It's me. Open up." Relief washed through her as she lifted the bar. The door swung open to reveal not James, but Jeremiah Morton, his scarred face illuminated by the lamp she'd left burning. "Hello, Eleanor," he said softly. "Did you miss me?" Time stopped. Sarah's hand flew to her pocket where Catherine's derringer waited, but Jeremiah was quicker. His fist connected with her temple, sending her stumbling backward. Stars exploded across her vision as she fought to remain conscious. "Ma!" Thomas's sleepy voice came from the cot, confusion quickly turning to terror as he registered the scene. "No! Hello, boy!" Jeremiah greeted him with mock joviality. "Remember me? I remember you. The brave little liar at Wolf Peak." Sarah struggled to her feet, positioning herself between Thomas and the intruder. "Where's James?" Jeremiah's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Your Marshall friend? Taking a little nap behind the livery. He'll wake with a headache, but otherwise unharmed." His gaze shifted to Thomas. "For now, at least. What do you want?" Sarah demanded, desperately trying to keep his attention on her. "Want?" Jeremiah laughed. A hollow, terrible sound. "What I've always wanted, Eleanor. Justice." "This isn't justice," Sarah countered, acutely aware of Thomas trembling behind her. "This is obsession. Madness." "Perhaps," Jeremiah conceded with unsettling calm. 2 months buried alive will do that to a man. There was an air shaft, you see, too small for escape, but enough to keep me breathing while I clawed my way out over weeks. Plenty of time to think about our reunion. His gaze drifted to Thomas, something calculating entering his expression. "He truly is Nathaniel's son, isn't it? Not just a convenient lie. My mother confirmed it." Sarah felt Thomas stiffen in surprise behind her. "Catherine would never." "Oh, but she did," Jeremiah interrupted. "Quite willingly, after our little chat at her hotel room tonight. She was most informative about the trust fund as well. My nephew, heir to the Morton fortune." He extended his hand toward Thomas. "Come, boy. Time to meet your real family." "You're not my family," Thomas replied, his voice steadier than Sarah expected. "You killed my pa. My real pa, Mr. Miller." Jeremiah's face darkened. "The farmer? He was nothing. A convenient father for a bastard. But Morton blood runs in your veins, boy. Worth more than this servant girl can offer you." His deliberate demotion of Sarah to her former status was meant to wound, to remind her of her place in the world as he saw it. "Thomas," Sarah said quietly, "when I move, run for the door. Find help." "Brave, but foolish," Jeremiah commented, pulling a pistol from his coat. "Neither of you is leaving this room without me." Sarah's fingers closed around the small derringer in her pocket. One shot. She would need to make it count. "What's your plan?" she asked, stalling for time. "Kill us both? The whole town is looking for you." "Not kill," Jeremiah replied, as if explaining something simple to a child. "Take what's mine. The boy, Morton blood." His gaze hardened. "You, however, have reached the end of your usefulness." As he raised his pistol toward Sarah, several things happened at once. Thomas lunged forward with the reckless courage of a child protecting a loved one. "No!" he shouted, colliding with Jeremiah's legs. Startled, the outlaw staggered, his shot going wild, splintering wood above Sarah's head. Sarah seized her moment, drawing the derringer and firing in one fluid motion. The small gun roared, its bullet finding Jeremiah's shoulder, his previously wounded one. He howled in pain, dropping his weapon. "Thomas, run!" Sarah screamed, pushing the boy toward the open door. But Thomas didn't run. Instead, he grabbed Jeremiah's fallen pistol, pointing it at the wounded man with shaking hands. "Don't move," the boy ordered, his voice high with fear but determined. "Or I'll shoot you like you shot my pa." Jeremiah, clutching his bleeding shoulder, stared at the child with mingled rage and disbelief. "You wouldn't dare. You're soft, like Nathaniel." "Try me," Thomas challenged, sounding much older than his 8 years. A commotion erupted outside, shouting voices, running footsteps. Help was coming, drawn by the gunshot. Jeremiah's eyes darted between Sarah, Thomas, and the door, calculating his chances. With surprising speed for a wounded man, he lunged toward the window, smashing the glass with his good arm. "This isn't over," he snarled, blood dripping from dozens of small cuts as he forced his body through the narrow opening, tearing away the bars that had been weakened by age and neglect. Before either Sarah or Thomas could react, he'd vanished into the night. James burst through the door seconds later, blood matting his hair where he'd been struck. "Sarah! Thomas! Relief washed over his face at finding them alive. What happened? I heard a shot. Jeremiah, Sarah gasped, the adrenaline that had sustained her suddenly ebbing. He escaped through the window. A dozen armed townsmen flooded the alley, but their shouts of frustration confirmed what Sarah already knew. Jeremiah had disappeared again, a ghost slipping between the fragile barriers of their security. In the chaos that followed, doctor summoned for James, search parties organized, the jail secured with new bars and locks. Thomas remained unnaturally quiet, the pistol carefully placed on the desk, his young face troubled. You were very brave, Sarah told him when they were finally alone. The marshal's office transformed into an armed camp with volunteers guarding every entrance. Thomas looked up at her, confusion in his eyes. He said, I'm a Morton. That my real father wasn't Mr. Miller at all. Is that true? The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. She and James had planned to tell him someday, when he was older, when he could understand the complexities of biology versus the deeper bonds of caregiving and love. But that choice had been taken from them by Jeremiah's cruelty. Now Thomas stared at her, awaiting an answer that could reshape his understanding of himself. It's complicated, Sarah began, sitting beside him on the cot. The man who raised you, who loved you as his son. He was your father in all the ways that truly matter. But not by blood, Thomas pressed, too perceptive to accept evasion. Sarah took a deep breath. No, not by blood. Your birth father was Nathaniel Morton, Jeremiah's brother. But he never knew about you, Thomas. And Mr. Miller chose you, loved you, raised you as his own. That makes him your real father. Thomas absorbed this, his young mind grappling with concepts many adults struggle to understand. Is that why you took me in? Because you knew? No, Sarah replied firmly. I had no idea when I first saw you in that alley. I fed you because you were hungry. I came to care for you because you were brave and kind and deserved to be loved. Nothing else mattered then. Nothing else matters now. The boy nodded slowly, processing. So the lady, Mrs. Morton, she's really my grandmother? Yes. But Thomas, this changes nothing about who you are or who you choose to become. You're still the same boy who draws maps and helps Hiram sweep the saloon and makes slightly lopsided flapjacks. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips at this last part. Will he come back again? Jeremiah. Sarah couldn't bring herself to lie. Probably. But next time we'll be better prepared. Dawn found Cottonwood Creek transformed. Armed men on rooftops, businesses closed, streets eerily empty. Catherine Morton, shaken but unharmed after her chat with Jeremiah, joined Sarah, Thomas, and James in the marshal's fortified office. I'm so sorry, she said, her aristocratic composure cracked by genuine remorse. He came to my room last night. I truly believed he'd come to reconcile, to accept that his vendetta had brought nothing but pain. Jeremiah doesn't want reconciliation, Sarah replied without rancor. He wants to destroy what he can't control. Catherine nodded sadly. And now he knows about Thomas, about the trust fund. I've put you all in even greater danger. James, his head bandaged but his resolve undiminished, outlined their options. The territorial governor has authorized a special posse. Jeremiah Morton is now wanted dead or alive with a substantial reward. Every lawman from here to Canada will be hunting him. That won't stop him, Catherine said quietly. Nothing will except. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They all understood what Jeremiah's obsession would eventually require. We can't live like this, Sarah declared, watching Thomas trying to appear brave as he helped clean James's rifle. Waiting for him to strike again. Jumping at shadows. What do you suggest? James asked. Sarah met his gaze steadily. We draw him out. On our terms, not his. Catherine looked alarmed. You're proposing to use yourselves as bait? With Thomas in danger. Thomas will be safe, Sarah assured her. That's the first requirement of any plan. But Jeremiah won't stop coming for us. Better to choose the battlefield than wait for him to corner us again. To everyone's surprise, Thomas spoke up. I want to help. Absolutely not. All three adults responded in unison. The boy's chin lifted stubbornly. He's after me too now. Because of my blood. I should get a say. James studied him with a mixture of pride and concern. What are you thinking, son? He wants me to be a Morton, Thomas said simply. So let him think I'm choosing to be one. The plan took shape over the next hours, dangerous, desperate, but with the clarity that comes from having no better options. News would spread that Thomas, upon learning his true parentage, had chosen to leave with Catherine to claim his inheritance. The stage would depart publicly for Cheyenne, carrying Catherine, Thomas, and several armed marshals disguised as ordinary passengers. Sarah and James, supposedly heartbroken by Thomas's decision, would follow a day later, alone and vulnerable, perfect targets for Jeremiah's vengeance. He'll see through it, Catherine worried. He'll want to believe it, Sarah countered. The idea that Thomas would choose Morton blood over us will appeal to his sense of family superiority. The trickiest part was convincing Mayor Henderson to announce Thomas's decision publicly, ensuring word would reach Jeremiah wherever he was hiding. Proclaiming a child's inheritance in these circumstances? Henderson sputtered. It's unconscionable. It's necessary, James replied grimly. Trust us, Robert. This ends now, one way or another. The next morning, Catherine and Thomas boarded the stage under the watchful eyes of half the town. Thomas played his part perfectly, chin high, refusing to look back at Sarah and James, who stood forlornly on the boardwalk. He'll make a fine actor someday, James murmured as the stage rolled away. 5 armed men concealed inside with instructions to protect Thomas at all costs. If we survive this charade, Sarah replied, her heart aching despite knowing Thomas was safer now than he'd been in town. They spent the day making conspicuous preparations for their own heartbroken journey to Cheyenne, ostensibly to try convincing Thomas to return. Word spread through town like wildfire. The orphan boy had chosen wealth over love. The cold-hearted Mortons had reclaimed one of their own. That night, alone in their cabin for the first time since Jeremiah's reappearance, Sarah and James waited in darkness. If their plan worked, Jeremiah would come for them here, away from town, believing Thomas safely beyond his reach. He might not take the bait, James said as midnight approached without incident. He will, Sarah replied with grim certainty. His hatred for me runs deeper than his desire for Thomas. He'll want to hurt me first, then pursue his nephew. As if summoned by her words, a floorboard creaked on the porch. James extinguished their last lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. They moved to their predetermined positions, James behind the door, Sarah seated at the table, apparently alone and vulnerable. The door opened slowly. Moonlight silhouetted a tall figure in the entrance. I know you're waiting for me, Eleanor. Jeremiah's voice came softly from the darkness. I know your martial friend is here too. Did you think I wouldn't recognize a trap? Sarah remained still, playing her part. Then why come? To finish what we started. He stepped fully into the cabin, his wounded shoulder bandaged but his movements fluid, dangerous. Tell me, how does it feel to lose the boy to his true family? To know he chose Morton blood over whatever pathetic affection you offered. The taunt stung, even knowing it was based on their manufactured lie. Thomas made his choice, Sarah replied, infusing her voice with false bitterness. Children are ungrateful. He'll learn what the Mortons truly are soon enough. Jeremiah laughed, the sound chilling in the darkness. Oh, Eleanor, still the bitter servant girl, resentful of her betters. He moved closer, seeming unconcerned about James's presumed presence. I visited your marshal's office before coming here. Found it intriguingly empty. Where is he really? Chasing me in the wrong direction, perhaps. Sarah's blood ran cold. James was supposed to be behind the door, waiting for Jeremiah to fully enter the cabin. He's right here, came James's voice, but from the window, not the door. He'd adapted to Jeremiah's unexpected approach. The outlaw whirled, surprisingly fast, drawing his pistol in the same motion. 2 shots exploded in the confined space, James's rifle and Jeremiah's pistol speaking simultaneously. A body fell heavily to the floor. For one horrible moment, Sarah couldn't tell who had been hit. "James?" she called desperately into the darkness. "I'm here," he answered, his voice tight with pain. "Got me in the arm." "Where is he?" Sarah fumbled for the lamp, finally striking a match. Light bloomed, revealing Jeremiah Morton sprawled on the cabin floor, blood spreading across his chest from James's bullet. But the outlaw wasn't dead. His eyes, hate-filled and fever-bright, fixed on Sarah as she approached cautiously. "You think this ends it?" he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Morton blood endures. The boy is ours now." "No," Sarah replied steadily, looking down at the man who had haunted her for so long. "Thomas will never be yours. Not your kind of Morton." Jeremiah's scarred face twisted in a grimace that might have been a smile. "We'll see," he whispered. "We'll see who he becomes." With those ominous words, Jeremiah Morton, the man who had terrorized 3 territories, who had murdered Thomas's adoptive father, who had pursued Sarah across 8 years of running, closed his eyes for the final time. 3 days later, James, his arm in a sling but his spirit unbowed, drove the wagon that carried Sarah to their reunion with Thomas. The boy spotted them from the hotel window in Cheyenne, racing down to the street with Catherine following at a more dignified pace. "Ma! Pa!" Thomas launched himself into Sarah's arms, all pretense of Morton pride forgotten. "Is it really over? For true this time?" "For true," James confirmed, tousling the boy's hair with his good hand. "We buried him proper, with witnesses from 4 towns. No coming back this time." Catherine approached more slowly, uncertainty in her bearing. "Marshall, Sarah, I'm relieved to see you both safe." The stiffness between the women remained, though softened by their shared concern for Thomas. Some bridges could be built only slowly, stone by careful stone. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, looking between the adults. Sarah knelt to his level, meeting his gaze directly. "That depends on you, Thomas. Catherine has offered to help with your education, to be part of your life as your grandmother. But your home is with us, if that's what you want." "Of course it's what I want." The boy looked scandalized at the suggestion it could be otherwise. "But—" he glanced at Catherine, showing a maturity beyond his years. "I'd like to know about my other family too. The good parts, not the bad." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored to share those stories with you." As summer faded into autumn, life in Cottonwood Creek settled into new patterns. The Bucking Bronco Saloon thrived under Hiram's management. While Sarah focused on her unexpected role as mother and wife, James continued his duties as marshal, though he spoke of retiring to focus on expanding their small ranch. Thomas attended the town school during the week and spent one Saturday each month with Catherine, who had established herself in Cheyenne. He returned from these visits full of stories about his biological father's adventures and talents, but always with the relief of a child coming home. On a crisp October evening, as golden aspen leaves drifted past their porch, Sarah watched Thomas and James practicing with a lariat in the yard. The boys' peals of laughter floated on the mountain air as James pretended to be hogtied. "He's happy," Catherine observed, joining Sarah on the porch steps. Her monthly visit had coincided with Thomas's 9th birthday, and she'd brought gifts: books, a proper compass, and a small portrait of Nathaniel as a young man. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "He is." "I wanted to ask you something," Catherine said after a moment. "The trust fund, I've restructured it. Half for Thomas's education as planned. But the other half—" "I don't want Morton money," Sarah began, an old defensiveness rising. "It's not for you," Catherine interrupted gently. "It's to establish a home for orphan children here in Wyoming Territory. Children like Thomas. Children like you once were." The unexpected proposal left Sarah speechless. "The papers need a name for the foundation," Catherine continued. "I thought perhaps the Sarah Blackwood Home for Children, unless you'd prefer your birth name." "No," Sarah said quickly. "Sarah Blackwood is who I chose to be. Who I am." Catherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes the family we choose matters more than the one we're born to." I think Thomas is learning that too. As dusk deepened around them, James and Thomas abandoned their play to join the women on the porch. The boy settled naturally between Sarah and James, belonging there as surely as the stars belonged in the Wyoming sky. "Tell me a story," Thomas requested, his head resting against Sarah's shoulder. "About when you first saw me in the alley." "Again," Sarah laughed. "You've heard it a dozen times." "I like that part," Thomas insisted. "When you decided to feed me even though I was a stranger." Sarah met James's eyes over the boy's head, reading in them the same wonder she felt, that such a simple act of kindness had changed all their lives so profoundly. "Well," she began, her voice softening with memory. "It was early morning in Cottonwood Creek. The sun was just coming up, painting the mountains gold. And there, in the alley behind the bucking bronco saloon, I spotted a hungry boy watching the back door. As twilight wrapped around them like a blanket, Sarah told their story once more. Not of Mortons and vengeance and running, but of bread offered to a stranger, of trust slowly built, of family forged by choice rather than blood, of a barmaid who secretly fed a quiet boy every day, until he wasn't a stranger anymore, but the heart that had finally taught her to stop running and start living.